So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Do we have any kind of report from Beth or not?
No, I haven't seen
Okay.
it.
And then, do we have any claims?
One of the first business that I would like to take up. The Carroll County Economic Development Corporation has an annual audit, and as such, the auditors send to debtors and creditors to confirm the information. They want to know about the remaining real estate in Heartland and industrial, whatever, park. The remaining unsold acreage is 39.99 acres. There was none sold in 19. And the amount of payments received from them was 0, so there's 39.99 acres remaining. If you would sign, Larry, as president, that auditor's reply, that would be great.
Okay.
We just do an independent audit.
That is correct, right, Laura?
Yes.
The first claim is concerning the 2015 bond to Regions Bank. It's for $48,234.38. I've attached to the claim.
Claim. Claim number.
182.
Move to approve claim 182.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Who do you want to sign this?
Who wants to be acting treasurer?
Since there's nobody from the authority, it doesn't matter whether it's commission
No.
okay.
Who wants to be acting treasurer during this meeting? Michelle, Lonnie, Jeff?
Need a motion to make her action.
Sure.
I move to make Michelle Cox acting treasurer for the day.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Michelle's treasurer for the day.
Okay, we'll need a report, a full report of the financial.
Might be a little light.
That's due the 31st, right, Barry?
Yeah. Thank you. The next claim is for the 2014 bond, and that's for $109,540.62. That's the biannual payment.
Move to approve claim 183.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries from claim 183.
And lastly, I'm glad to see that Mayor Evans is here. The claim of Bowen Engineering Corporation. That's regarding the Delphi Water project. And he's asking us, this board, to pay $600,000.
I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve claim 184, and like to hear from Shane.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Would you like a synopsis? Would you like a synopsis? So originally, the plan was, the city of Delphi would ask for 5 installments of $200,000 each to go towards construction on phase 2 of the water project, to Bowen Engineering. Due to the coronavirus, some of the claims that they submitted, or the invoices that Bowen submitted, got delayed. So they go through, they put all the line items in, their quantities, but then that's gotta get reviewed by the engineering firm that's doing the inspection on the job. Then it comes to the city, and then we further review it before we submit claims. And it just so happens that the first 3 claims for phase 2 of the water project all coincided at the same time. I think that total amount was 1.1, 1.2 million. We're asking 600,000 of it from the Redevelopment Commission, and the remainder from Indiana Finance Authority using the bonds that we put out for phase 2 of the project.
Everything going well with it?
Yes, sir.
On schedule?
Wilson Street, we are done with the open cut to Main, and we got base asphalt in, I believe, last week. They're working on boring from essentially Main Street to the park, up the hill, where they'll be open cutting from Riley Road to Ifke. So everything's right on schedule. Hopefully don't run into any more limestone. We shouldn't with where we're at now, but the project's progressing. So,
Thank you, Sean.
Madam Treasurer, do we have enough money in the checking to make this payment?
We have a motion and a second to approve the claim 184.
Yeah, it's already been moved and
Excuse
seconded.
me?
It's already been moved and seconded.
Yeah, that's what I said, we had a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Claim 184. Bowen.
Is that not here?
She's not subject.
So,
We will have,
yeah, I want
I'll
to make sure.
talk, I need to call her when she gets back. Will she be back next week? You know, Doug?
Yeah.
I'll call her next week and tell her that she's got to transfer.
This, with those two.
Yes.
It'll be 750.
We'll need some more money in 451.
Yeah.
Looks like in the June meeting, we had 492,000 in that fund. In the reserve fund, reserve savings, we had 1 million.
Yeah, there's, we just need to make sure when she goes to cut the check, she moves an equal number.
I'm gonna take it out of it.
It comes out with, she'll need to transfer something.
She'll transfer on it here in the savings. Okay.
We need a motion for that, or we just put that out.
Oh, I think, motion for the
question is, are you wanting to keep some of your 4501 besides?
I think the way he stated, it will give her some flexibility to
Okay.
spend that now, but yet leave some.
Yeah,
There's no sense in the person.
right.
Right.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, all in favor, say aye.
Right.
Opposed, motion carries, so, up that way.
Then I believe Josh had, something he wanted to present to the board.
So at our, is that all right, Larry?
Excuse me?
It's all right?
Yep.
Yeah. So at our March meeting, I believe, well, it's been a while ago, we had a discussion surrounding residential TIF, and the board had asked me to do some research on that. So I provided a list here, shows all the housing starts. I talked to Matt Epperly and Rick Hall, and it appears as though we will qualify for the program, I guess, for the lack of a better word, to be able to do the residential TIF. So just for some context, Matt, I talked extensively with Matt about the nuts and bolts of the program. And essentially, we can use the funds of the IPC TIF to work in tandem with a residential TIF because of the, and this has been done in Gibson County, it's been in Princeton, and several communities have already utilized this tool. And so the idea is to provide workforce housing for the TIF. So, you know, Matt and Rick have both said, so this email that's printed here is a copy from Matt Eckerly. I also talked to Rick Hall this morning, and he said there's a number of mechanisms and contracts that we can put in place to fund this, but all signs point that it is feasible, and I think that there's interest, and we have somebody here today that'd like to just kind of give this idea on a project that would probably fit this, if it suits the board.
We still need to do a lot of discussion on this, I think, and the best way for me to suggest the discussion part of it is that I think we need to get Barry and Rick and Matt here to discuss some things about how to set it up, where the money is gonna come from, how the payback gonna work. And yes, we do have somebody that has suggested some interest in doing this. And the other thing I was kind of thinking of is, we get all these nuts and bolts together, do we want to do just one, or do we want to make it so there's a proposal from other people that might be interested in doing this, and then decide what we want to do, or how much we want to fund, whatever. So, I'm open for discussion from this group, where they want to go, and what steps we want to take.
Could someone refresh my memory, because I thought back when we first started talking about this, there was some kind of thing about the numbers, and we had to see where the numbers were as far as home starts before we could qualify for certain something.
And that's what this data is for.
Well, I see what the data is, but what were the numbers that we had to hit?
It's 1% of housing starts. So your housing starts cannot exceed 1% of the total doors, I believe, or total residences.
So how's that calculated?
By people smarter than me. No, it's, we would have to have, Barry work alongside with Rick to file the paperwork.
Yeah, I would think Matt would.
Yeah, Matt would also be involved.
would do it. I think you look at the total residents residences, and then you look at the new housing starts in that township we're talking about, and if it's 1% or less, you qualify.
So it's by township.
Yeah.
The question, I guess there's a couple questions that I have. One is that we need to make sure when we sit down with Matt and Rick and Barry and all that, is to find out and make sure we understand how we're gonna work out the payback on it. That's my biggest problem with this situation right now is how is the payback gonna work? And how's it gonna come back to us? And how many years is it gonna be out there?
It's good, I mean, so I had this conversation because I wanted to look at what other counties have done and get some examples. So, there's several different ways to do it, but like, the one that I think is the most attractive, in my opinion, is I'll just say the IPC tip, just for ease of using it. The IPC tip can build, put in infrastructure for a housing development. Okay, a new TIF can be formed over that geography to capture the incremental funds, and then those incremental funds be paid back to the IPC TIF. On top of that, then the property developer, we can have a similar relationship to how we've done it for the EDC. It would be slightly different, but in essence, the developer would then pay so much per lot as they sell to service that debt.
Yeah, I understand all that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, we have the one that was set up with EDC on it, but we have to put a stipulation on it, continue to sell a lot by so many years. Where with residential, we have the possibility to set it and say, okay, you have to sell at least 2 lots a year. If we want to, those are gonna be the little things that's gonna count the most.
Oh,
And I don't want it, and I don't want to detriment anybody from not wanting to come to us and do this, because we definitely need it. I would rather have it here than I would go to Tippecanoe County or Howard County or Clinton County. So, yes, I think it's something we need to look at, but I really want us to have all our ducks in the pond when we do this.
Can we get a meeting with Rick? I feel comfortable with having that meeting and having them explain exactly the ins and outs, the details,
And maybe Matt could even
Yeah.
show some kind of figure for us, if we're going to, maybe based off, maybe we can use somebody's housing development theory of what they're thinking their projection's gonna be, and what the houses are gonna cost, what the lots are gonna cost, and that'll give us some kind of idea of what kind of return we're thinking of and how many years we wanna put that out there for.
No, that's exactly what it's set up to do. So, I mean, the big thing, and then like, we have two bankers sitting here, and like, you know, I'm sure that you've both seen developments that didn't get funded, and especially in rural communities, because the fear is that you, as a financial institution, there's not gonna be enough cash flow to carry the note, unless somebody's coming in with a huge check of cash on the thing, right? But, the benefit of the TIF is that, you're capturing incremental funds to be able to pay for that infrastructure, or pay back on that infrastructure, plus the money that's recouped from the sale. So, I mean, if you, I guess what I'm saying is, if you turn this around, and a banking institution had the ability to acquire TIF, it would change the calculus for that note. So this body is the only body that has all of these tools at their resource, and something that can really help participate in the risk and do it in a responsible way.
My question to Barry is, and maybe he can't answer it, maybe he can, but if we're gonna do a residential TIF, does it have to be adjacent or close to the TIF that we do have today, or can we do a residential TIF in Monroe Township.
If you would have asked me before on that question, before I read Matt Eckerly's report to Josh, I would have said, I don't know. But after reading that report, it appears that, yes, you can have, distance, like in Jefferson County and Deerfield County. You're tying two together by obligations. No, they don't have to be contiguous. So that's my, that's what has been.
Yeah, well, the understanding you have now. Okay.
And my conversation with Rick mirrored that this morning, so, he said, obviously come out and discuss it further, but that was his assessment as well. And Rick and Matt worked on one or two of these projects together already,
Okay.
so this is not their first go around.
I said Jefferson County, so no longer
Yes, I
Jefferson
know.
Township.
We understood what he's talking about.
Yeah. And from the service of the TIF, from the perspective of servicing the TIF, Indiana Packers, you know, has said for years that they need more workforce here.
Correct.
And, you know, they're big advocates of that because they're best, you know, I won't say they're best employees, but they have very good luck with residents that are making a career of working there versus somebody that works there for its time and, you know, is passing through. So, whether that person lives in Jackson Township or Monroe Township, it's kind of irrelevant, you know, they just need them
Right.
here.
Right.
You know, it's 15 minutes in whatever direction it is.
But I just wanna make sure that
Yeah, no, you're
there's
right.
no stipulations on, you know,
Yeah.
since we only have one TIF district.
Mhm.
So that's the main thing I think we have to look at on that side of it. Does anybody else have any questions?
I haven't been totally up to speed on this, so, that's why I think I'd feel more comfortable getting Rick here
I agree.
and getting some
So-
details and find out what can be considered infrastructure and what's not infrastructure.
Good question.
Can we get them here by the August meeting?
Sure.
Do we wanna give a couple?
I don't know their
Can
schedules, but.
we get a couple dates out for them so we can change our schedule if we have to have a meeting date? Do I have any comments from the?
I believe the next meeting is the 10th.
August 10th, yes, that would be the original meeting.
Larry, I'd just like to add that the timing of this, if you pursue this, the timing is really good right now because of relatively new federal tax legislation and the creation of opportunity zones. And so part of the TIF, a good chunk of the TIF district, especially what has been earmarked for residential growth as part of the TIF strategic plan that we did a couple years ago, is in an opportunity zone. So, so there's already incentive for investment in multi-unit, multifamily housing is very attractive in the opportunity zone. So so the developers if they could leverage local incentives on top of the federal capital gains incentives, I think that will help spur interest as well. And I also, as we talked about earlier, talking about infrastructure, I like the idea of requiring these new residential developments, if they're going to be incentivized, to be fiber ready, or so that we are developing good housing stock that has the internet that modern families require, no longer just prefer. And also, just brainstorming the thought of potentially working with the county commissioners and the highway department, just before the commissioners do their 2021 edit budget, if there's a way to, the funds that are earmarked for the county highway department, if a portion of those could be earmarked for residential roads or new residential roads, so that, just leveraging all these different programs to maximize the return on investment.
Is all subdivisions, I guess I'm gonna call it a subdivision, whatever we're looking at, are they all county roads, or are they, some of them privately owned roads?
So if you do not wanna maintain it yourself, the homeowners association or whatever, you have to build it to the county specs at your expense. And then you deed it over, basically, to the county, dedicate the road to the county, and then they will maintain it, but it's gotta be built to their specs, which require, a certain amounts of stone, package. They're actually pretty light specs for today's heavy trucks, but otherwise, if you build it, like, I don't know exactly all the bluff. At one time, it may be county now, but at one time it was not. Their owners paid in the snow removal and stuff, but I think the county took it over. I don't know how we got to that. Which
Brian?
requires proper drainage and everything else.
Do you have anything, a comment you would like to throw out at us, so if there's a question when we meet with Matt and them, is there anything that would come up?
No, I'd be willing to be part of that, if you want me to. And I think it's a good idea. Like Laura said, it's kind of one of the big issues that housing needs to be addressed. In some way, you have to incentivize it. And I know we have, some, it may be worthwhile, as Larry said, to kind of open it up and put a request for proposals out there and say, hey, developers or property owners, tell me what you're thinking and what you'd like to see back. And give some examples on what you would like to see and how that would work. And I think between Rick and Matt, myself, Ford, everyone, everybody involved, Barry, you could probably come up with some stuff and just see what you get. And that way you're not favoring one landowner or one developer over another.
And we're talking about, when I mentioned, partnering with the county commissioners, I think there's also an opportunity to partner with the city of Delphi, because some of the TIF district is within city limits, and as Mayor Evans has said previously, that housing is a top priority for, not only for the city, but for the school system as well. And so I can imagine that the Delphi schools, and if you wanted to look eastward, Carroll schools would be very interested in being at the table as well, because this will directly impact their funding.
That's true. I mean, the funding model for the schools is such now that the butts and seats, excuse my word or language, but butts and seats is a much bigger priority than property taxes. I mean, the funding model is so skewed now. I mean, like, so for example, a $100,000 house, might, so let's say a house is assessed for $100,000, it's in Deer Creek Township, it's got a $1.50 rate. You're looking, by the time you take your deductions off that $100,000 house, you pay property taxes on $50,000, so you're looking at $750. The state portion for that student is in excess of $5,000. So whatever, so I think there's pretty broad-based support for getting more students there versus worrying about the tax dollars. And whenever the TIP leaves, those tax dollars will go back towards the school as well.
Right. Okay, how do we wanna do we wanna give 3 dates to Matt and Rick, Barry, or do you want just to see if they can, they'll come and then send out an email if they can't come, and we'll change our date? Okay. Yeah, what is everybody's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd see it work for them.
Being, I know this is a timing thing, and, you know, we're 3 months into this because of the COVID and everything, so, I would like to see Barry, have a conversation with, Rick about starting the paperwork, so that we can be doing that in the background. Because nothing, we can't start any projects if the paperwork doesn't get through, and who knows what that time frame looks like. I mean, we have no frame of reference for that, so I'd at least like to have that started in the background while we're doing this, we can work in parallel.
I really don't see how that would be helpful, other than if we're meeting with Rick and Matt. Because really, this is the 13th, within the next 20 days.
Oh, so you're saying at the
Yeah,
next meeting,
before
or,
the next meeting,
well, that's what I was saying,
way I understand.
to have that ready for the next meeting, the paperwork ready for the.
Yeah, but you can't create the paperwork if you don't even know where the application area is gonna be. So that's
Well-
the time.
Sure.
That it takes.
He can develop a schedule though and say, at this point, we develop the, or, you know, at this point, we take proposals, this point, we develop that. And then, and that way, you can kind of give people an idea of how long this is gonna take, I think, is where Josh is going. Is this gonna be a 3-month process? We all know it's probably gonna be a 6-month process
Yeah.
before anything happens. I think that's what we're looking for.
Or more.
I think a year.
Cause it took, when we had just expanded it the last time, it probably took us a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Rick should have
Yeah.
that and say, this is what you kind of need, these are the steps you need to take, and that way you guys kind of know.
But I agree kind of with Josh in a way. Josh, I wanna say, why do we wanna spend our money on Barry's time to do something before we meet with Rick and Matt, and then we come up with whatever Barry had spent his time on, we've changed completely.
Well, I guess my only thought to that is, if we don't have the approval from the state to do it, we're wasting our time having a meeting with Rick.
Not necessarily. I guess I look at it that the meeting that we're having is an informational meeting for us to make a decision on whether we wanna do this. And then after we meet with them and discuss this, then we come up with our guidelines are, then we can go to the state if we just so decide to.
Well, but like in that scenario, theoretically, you could go through all those motions and spend Barry's time and Rick's time and Matt's time, and then stay say no. So, like, all we're doing is checking a box to say, this is possible. See what I'm saying?
When the state, in your reference of getting approval from the state, I don't know what they're approving.
The
I
ability
mean,
to
it's
form a
just
TIF.
a general idea of forming a TIF, regardless of where it's at, what areas encompassed, how big it is.
Well, and that's what I would like.
I don't know what the
And who
application looks like.
who is the approving body? I don't know that.
Yeah, that's,
You know,
all Matt said, well, Matt gave us the form last time in March, and he said that was the, step one was to get approved to be able to do it, so. That would also inform our conversation about, you know, are we doing this, where can we do this, where, you know, so if we take RFPs from half the county that's not eligible, then, that's kind of a waste of a lot of people's time, so. I don't know, I mean, that's.
I think we ought to understand the process before we start trying to get an approval on something we don't know what we're getting approved or who's
I have to
authorized to
agree
make
with
the
that,
approval. And it may be a financial approval, that the current TIF has the ability to support something. At what size, I don't know.
Yeah, how much are you thinking, Christian?
What's that?
For the infrastructure, how much area are we talking about?
Well, that's definitely what we need to discuss.
And how much roads are you talking about? How much sewer and water are you talking about?
Well, I mean, maybe we should hear from Ken, he can discuss the one project, and then we can kind of look from what that looks like, so we can extrapolate that.
That's up to Ken, I guess, if he wants to, he doesn't have to disclose anything to us.
Sure. So as far as the cost, it could be somewhere in the range of 350 to 400,000 for the infrastructure, including such things as gas, roads, fiber optic ready, I'm forgetting something. Bear with me. Electric, thank you. And that would be based on potential of 18 sites on the property. However, we have to prove the septic capacity before we can assume 18, but that would be probably a maximum number. Could potentially be 2 or 3 less than that, depending on the septic. What other question did you have, Barry? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's the total cost, did you say?
For the infrastructure?
Total.
Infrastructure total will be 350 to 400,000. Probably on the, closer to 380 is the closest I can get, but
Do we even need a bond?
Oh, that could be paid out of cash.
Yeah, not necessarily. It's whatever we would decide whether you wanna do a bond or not, but I wouldn't wanna do a bond with that, but
Right.
I think we have to sit down and we have to look at the whole, how much do we wanna spend? How big a residential area do you want to do? Are we gonna limit it to 30 houses, 25 houses, 50 houses, 100 houses?
I think he said 18.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
Well, I think, I would hope we would try to do as much as we can to be fiscally responsible. I mean, but, you know, that's what we pay Matt for, to tell us what's, you know, fiscally responsible. But, you know, there are, you know, some definite long-term benefits for the TIF, to look further into.
I think we just really need to sit down with Barry, Matt, and Rick, and then we see where we're at when we get done with that meeting. To go forward on. But yes, I agree, and it's in our own strategic plan that we knew that residential needed something done to within the next, 10 years or 15 years or whatever our strategic plan was for, so. It's something we really need to look into right now at this time, so. Yeah.
And, I mean, do we need to get EDC involved, because, weren't they instrumental in the expansion out here? I can't draw a line right at the moment, but, there was a proposed, when they put the church in, there was a proposed road that connects Dayton Road, and that was all to be deemed. I think that, I'm looking at you, because I think
Right.
they kind of identified that as that's where they wanted residential to go. So, if that's the plan, I don't know, should you try to drive that, if that's already been what's been laid out? I don't know.
So we have tried to drive that, or we've continued to drive that. The number one issue has been, real estate prices making sense for the developers where they had a return on investment. The price for land, is above market value out there, and the, profit margins for these residential developments are very tight, and, which is another reason for, the need for incentives. I was gonna say later, but, last Thursday, the EDC board met, to begin our a new strategic plan for our organization. And, so the first step, the board identified priorities, and of our top 3 priorities, housing was one of them. And now we need to start looking at what are some of the steps that we can take to promote housing. Our next step is going to be, getting input and buy-in from our stakeholders. So most likely next week, RDC members will receive an email basically summarizing, our first strategy session, getting your input, and then after we get input from stakeholders, we'll bring them, in public meetings, like this one, and do a very, very brief presentation on, and then, elicit help from from the town boards and councils and RDC, to join a housing committee and help, if we wanna do something that is as collaborative as working with the council commissioners, the city, the schools, on identifying residential TIFs and coming up with an incentive plan. I think it needs to be, there's an opportunity here for this to cover a broad spectrum of stakeholders and, set an example moving forward of how to do this properly. And so the EDC very much wants to be at the table. We think housing is incredibly important. It ties in with business attraction, business retention and expansion, and obviously workforce development, our schools. So it is a priority for us. We want to be involved.
I will say that I think this needs to be looked at as a bigger picture than this project alone. My project is simply an example that could be used for discussion purposes, but it's not about this project alone, okay? So.
Yeah, and I understand that, yeah, we gotta look at not only your project, but we have to look at what we see coming down the road.
And that's the reason I'm here.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Alrighty, Brian, the only thing you got is you still got a hold of return phone call back on the cement out there.
Me,
No. I drove by this morning, it looks good, it's holding in
Yeah.
place, I don't see any problems with it. The farmer has farms right up to it, we hoped it would provide a little bit of a break, a lot of waterway there on, but hasn't, but it is holding, so. My personal opinion, may just let it sit.
it may be fine
The,
until it's not.
Highway department seems to be okay with it. Talked to Paul, and he seems to be fine with the way it was put in and the way it's holding, so. We did survey work on, the road, 421 there, 39. So we've got that in, we should have something next meeting to present, to talk about, okay, if we wanna, expand that and widen that road and provide improvement to County Road 100 and 421. We'll have some stuff there, a little bit better idea with moving forward. So we're still looking another year and a half before we did a project there, so we got time.
Thank you,
I
Brian.
think we're in good shape.
Laura, do you have anything else you wanna add?
Yeah, real quick, if you haven't driven by the industrial park lately, Heartland Drive looks a little different. The county micro sealed it, not long after the last RDC meeting that we had out in the parking lot. So, it covered up the striping on the road. The plan was not to replace the striping. I've talked to Paul. Hopefully we can get the county to at least put the striping back at the entrance at 421. And if you're going by, maybe just swing on in and drive around the road a couple times. We need traffic on it to.
You got a counter out there?
Yeah. No counter, but just trying to get that feel like it needs driven on. A minivan only does so much.
Okay, anything else? Barry, you got anything else? Next meeting on August 10th, 1 p.m.
Now, when would you like the two-edged traffic at the housing? When would you like to meet with, Rick and Matt?
The tenth would be preferable, but, you know,
Is that what you're
Rick's,
wanting?
I mean, that would be preferable to me, because I already have the calendar.
Okay.
Rick's schedule is impossible, so I would venture to guess there's like a 10% chance that that's gonna work for him. I would say we probably need to be flexible and get dates for him.
Even if it was,
Even if somebody from Rick's
However-
office,
yeah,
you don't
however
have
long
to
it's
be
gonna
Rick, I
take.
guess, you know,
I mean, if they wanna meet before lunch, we could even
yes.
order a box of lunch. or
Can you do a
something.
video?
What?
Can you do a video conference with them?
Probably do that, yeah.
I know.
Somebody got capability.
Well, if you do it.
I got phone
No,
number
but we can
based
do
on
that.
it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know if we still have the ability to do video. We'd have to look into the legalities of having a virtual meeting. I mean, commissioners and council both had virtual meetings, and I just had to figure it out.
Or if it's just for
When-
information service, you know, you're not taking any action. I don't know.
So one piece of clarification I'd like to butt in, on those numbers I offered you, they're just early estimates from different parties. There's different credits that will and likely apply in different places, so I haven't got the whole picture, so please use it with a ton of salt.
Yeah, and like, I knew that came going in, those are just estimated figures.
Yeah.
You can be way high or you can be way low.
Yeah, and I know there are certain credits that will apply, but they have not gotten those to me yet. So,
Okay, thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Hey, you have a,
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay.
I was hoping it, well, I thought it was me, but I was hoping it was you.
She's ignoring me, yeah.
Your black truck?
Oh, never.
Why?
Can you give me a copy of a list of EDC members,
Just couldn't get it.
wherever
Thank
they
you,
are?
Michelle.
Who are the
He
officers?
said it's getting really bad.
Great, thanks. And you've got my email.
I've heard, that's the word, wasn't it?
Yes, okay.
Uh,
Thank you so much.
Oh,
So, let's see.
Okay.
Oh,
Take care.
Really, you
Be
can have
safe.
some of these if you want.
ignition coil, which is $95, that's why I don't really work on. Normally, you know, just takes a day.
Carol, great to see you. How are
Takes
you?
3 days. He said it takes several months. Good job. You can find it.
Yeah. No, the plan, yeah.
Excited about your project.
Yeah. No, I did.
So what are you working on? Get all your.
I didn't have-
Great for Carroll County.
Yeah.
So Laura?
They're probably